A worthless ranch doesn't bring 7 Apache riders before sundown. Caleb Morgan heard the thought in his own head before he dared say it aloud. He stood beside the broken porch of Red Hollow Ranch, one hand resting against the warm leather of his saddle, watching 7 dark figures appear along the western ridge. They had come without dust, without shouting, without warning. The sinking sun burned behind them, turning horses and riders into black silhouettes against a sky the color of old copper. Wind moved through the dead grass around Caleb's boots, carrying the smell of sage, dry timber, and the sweat of a horse ridden too far. None of the riders raised a weapon. None came closer. They simply watched. Caleb had owned Red Hollow for 6 hours. That was the part he could not explain. At noon, the men in Dry Creek had laughed when his name was written onto the deed. By evening, the Apache already knew he was here. His bay gelding shifted nervously. Caleb rubbed the animal's neck. Easy. The horse did not believe him. Neither did Caleb. The ranch looked exactly like the kind of mistakes Silas Boone had described. The barn leaned south. Half the corral had collapsed. One shutter hung from a single hinge and knocked softly against the cabin wall. The well beside the house had been covered with thick, weathered boards, each one nailed down hard enough to suggest somebody had wanted it closed for good. No cattle, no crops, no smoke from a chimney, nothing worth fighting over. Yet 7 Apache riders sat above it like men waiting for something. Caleb stepped away from his horse. Slowly, his revolver remained holstered. He had learned years ago that touching a gun too soon could turn fear into blood before either man understood what frightened him. He lifted one hand. Evening. The word traveled up the slope. No answer came back. One rider moved forward half a horse length. Caleb could not see his face, only the faint flash of silver near the bridle. Then the rider turned his head toward the old well. Not the cabin. Not Caleb. The well. Caleb noticed. A moment later, all 7 riders turned away. They disappeared behind the ridge one by one. No threat. No warning. No explanation. Caleb watched until the last horse vanished. Then he looked at the boarded well. That's comforting. His horse flicked an ear. Inside the cabin, evening had already become darkness. Caleb lit a lantern. Dust floated through the yellow light. The place smelled of cedar, mice, and 20 years of silence. He pulled his bedroll from the doorway and kicked aside a loose floorboard. Something beneath it scraped against his boot. Metal. Caleb crouched, worked the plank free. Beneath the dust lay half of a silver medallion. An eagle had been carved across its surface, broken straight through the middle. Caleb turned it over in his palm. Outside, far beyond the ridge, a horse called once. Another answered. Caleb slowly raised his eyes toward the door. Red Hollow Ranch had been forgotten by everyone in Dry Creek. But somebody had remembered it, and whatever they remembered had just been waiting beneath his floor. By morning, Caleb Morgan had decided there were 2 things wrong with Red Hollow Ranch. The first was obvious. Nobody wanted it. The second was worse. Somebody did. He remembered the auction clearly now. Dry Creek had been hot enough to make the hitching rails shine. Men crowded beneath the awning outside the land office, half listening, half laughing as parcel after parcel changed hands. Then Elias Turner's property came up. Red Hollow Ranch. 140 acres. A damaged barn. A boarded well. Poor grazing. No working irrigation. The auctioneer read the description like a man announcing a funeral. Silas Boone laughed first. That place ain't worth the dirt on your boots. A few men joined him. Caleb did not. He had spent too many years sleeping in bunkhouses to laugh at a roof just because it leaked. The bidding opened low. Nobody moved. Lower. Still nothing. Caleb raised one hand. The room turned toward him. $42. Someone behind him muttered, "Fool." Caleb kept his eyes forward. The auctioneer hesitated only long enough to make sure nobody else was interested. Sold. That should have been the whole story. Except Elias Turner did not hand over the deed immediately. The old man sat behind the desk, thin hands resting on the folded paper. He looked tired, not weak. There was a difference. "You buying land?" Elias asked. "Or responsibility?" Caleb frowned. "Thought I was buying a ranch." "That wasn't my question." The room had gone quieter. Even Silas stopped smiling. Caleb glanced toward the window. Dust rolled through Dry Creek in long pale sheets. "I figure land doesn't belong to a man forever." Elias watched him. "No, then I suppose responsibility lasts longer." Something changed in the old man's face. Small. Almost relief. He signed. Outside, Silas caught Caleb beside his horse. I'll give you 80. Caleb looked at him. You just called it worthless. I changed my mind. That quick. Silas smiled. His eyes did not. Caleb mounted. No, Silas's jaw tightened. Before Caleb could ride away, Elias stepped from the office. He walked slowly to the horse and placed one hand on the saddle. If they come, he said, listen before you reach for iron. Caleb looked down at him. Who? Elias released the saddle. But he did not answer. Now, standing inside the broken cabin with half a silver medallion in his palm, Caleb understood one thing. The old man had expected visitors. Maybe even the 7 riders on the ridge. Caleb turned the silver piece over beneath the morning light. Along the broken edge were faint scratches. Not damage. Marks. Deliberate. Before he could study them, his bay gelding snorted outside. Caleb stepped onto the porch. One rider was coming down from the eastern ridge. Not 7. 1. A woman. Apache. She rode slowly, hands visible, posture straight. Then she saw the silver in Caleb's hand. Her horse stopped. So did she. For the first time, the calm left her face. And Caleb knew the medallion meant far more than $42 of dead land. The Apache woman remained still for 3 breaths. Caleb Morgan counted them without meaning to. The first while she stared at the silver medallion. The second while her eyes moved to the broken edge. The third while something older than surprise settled across her face. Then she dismounted. Her boots touched the dirt softly. Caleb noticed the details now. Long black hair braided down her back. Buckskin worn smooth at the shoulders. A narrow silver band around one wrist. No rifle in her hands. No fear in her posture. Only caution. My name is Maya Redbird, she said. Her English was quiet and precise. Caleb nodded. Caleb Morgan. I know. That bothered him. You know my name? I know who bought Red Hollow. She looked again at the medallion. Caleb closed his fingers around it. You rode all this way for a piece of silver? Maya's gaze lifted to his. No, then why? She stepped closer. Not enough to threaten. Enough to see what he was holding. Where did you find it? Under the floor. Her expression tightened. Show me. Caleb did not move. Yesterday, 7 Apache riders had watched his ranch from the ridge. Today, one woman had arrived knowing his name. A smart man might have refused. Caleb had never claimed to be especially smart. He stepped aside. Inside the cabin, morning light cut through cracks in the wall. Dust floated around them. Maya crouched near the loose floorboard. Her fingers brushed the carved mark beneath it. A split eagle. She went still. You recognize that too. Maya stood. My grandfather carried the other half. Caleb looked at the silver in his palm. So this belonged to him. No, the answer came fast. Too fast for confusion. Caleb waited. Maya glanced toward the boarded well outside. This half belonged to someone who made a promise with him. What promise? She did not answer. Instead, she walked to the doorway. Her eyes fixed on the heavy boards nailed over the old well. Do not open that. Caleb almost laughed. Everyone keeps telling me what not to do on my own ranch. Then listen before someone tells you too late. Her voice had changed. Still quiet, but urgent now. Caleb followed her outside. What's under it? Maya turned. For the first time, he saw fear. Not fear of him. Fear of what he might choose. Before she could speak, dust rose on the southern road. 3 riders. Coming fast. Maya saw them. Her face hardened. Boone. Caleb looked toward the approaching horses. You know Silas? I know what he wants. And what's that? She looked at the ranch. Then the well. Then the silver medallion in Caleb's hand. More than he told you. The riders were close now. Maya mounted. Caleb caught the reins lightly. Wait. Her eyes dropped to his hand. He released them. If my people wanted this ranch, cowboy, she said, you would not still be standing here. Then she leaned closer. If Boone asks about the silver, tell him you found nothing. She turned her horse toward the ridge. Caleb watched her ride away. Behind him, the boarded well creaked under the heat. Ahead, Silas Boone was coming with 2 men and a smile. And for the first time since buying Red Hollow, Caleb understood something clearly. The Apache were not the ones trying to take his ranch. Silas Boone arrived wearing the kind of smile Caleb Morgan had learned not to trust. Too easy. Too polished. Too certain. The 2 riders behind him stopped near the broken fence, while Silas brought his horse closer to the porch. Caleb stood in the yard. The silver medallion was no longer in his hand. He had slipped it beneath his shirt before the riders reached Red Hollow. Silas looked past him toward the cabin, then the barn, then the boarded well. His eyes stayed there half a second too long. You settling in? Caleb shrugged. Depends what you call settling. Silas smiled. See anybody out here? There it was. Not hello. Not congratulations. That question. Caleb scratched his jaw. Couple rabbits. Silas's expression barely changed. Apache rabbits? One of the men behind him laughed. Caleb did not. Silas dismounted. Dust rolled around his boots. I saw a rider leaving. Then you saw more than I did. Silas walked toward the porch. Caleb stepped sideways, not blocking him, just enough to make the point. Silas stopped. His eyes narrowed. I came to make you an offer. You already did. I came to make a better one. From inside his coat, Silas pulled folded bills. Caleb glanced down. How much? 400. Caleb looked at him, then at the ranch, the sagging barn, the dead grass, the roof that needed replacing before winter. $400 was nearly 10 times what he had paid. Yesterday, Red Hollow had been a joke. Today, it had become valuable. Caleb smiled faintly. That's generous. I'm in a generous mood. Funny timing. Silas's jaw tightened. Caleb saw it. Small. But there. Silas folded the money again. I heard the railroad may survey this side of the valley. That right. Could make the land useful. Then maybe I should keep it. The smile disappeared. Only for a moment. Silas glanced toward the well again. You opened that yet? Caleb followed his eyes. The well. Just asking. Why? Silas shrugged. Old water can turn bad. Caleb looked back at him. Water turns bad. Silas's voice hardened. You know what I mean. No. Caleb did not. But Maya did. That was enough. Silas stepped closer. If you found anything inside the cabin, old papers, survey markers, silver, that belongs in county records. Caleb's pulse slowed. Not quickened. Slowed. The way it always did when something dangerous finally showed its face. Silver. Silas realized the mistake. Too late. Caleb watched him carefully. What kind of silver? Could be anything. You seem pretty specific for anything. The men near the fence stopped smiling. Silas tucked the money away. Take the 400. No, 5. Caleb almost laughed. No, Silas stared at him. What exactly do you think you bought? Caleb looked toward the boarded well. I'm starting to wonder. Silas mounted. Before leaving, he leaned down slightly. Wondering gets expensive out here, cowboy. Caleb met his eyes. So does lying. The riders turned south. Caleb watched them disappear into the dust. Then he pulled the medallion from beneath his shirt. Yesterday, nobody wanted Red Hollow. Now Silas Boone was willing to pay more every hour. And Caleb was beginning to understand the real question. Not what the ranch was worth, but what Silas was afraid he might find. Caleb Morgan returned to Dry Creek before noon, carrying more questions than answers. The town looked the same. That bothered him. Wagons creaked past the mercantile. A dog slept beneath the shade of the barber shop. 2 men argued over a sack of feed as though nothing in the world mattered beyond the price of grain. But somewhere beneath all that ordinary noise, Caleb could feel a lie. He went first to the land office. Elias Turner was gone. The chair behind the desk sat empty. Sheriff Henry Cole stood near the back wall, reading a notice. Walter Briggs, the county clerk, avoided Caleb's eyes the moment he entered. Where's Turner? Walter dipped his pen into ink. Left town. When? This morning. Where? Walter shrugged. Didn't say. Caleb watched him. A man lying badly usually looked busy. Walter looked very busy. Sheriff Henry folded the paper in his hand. What happened at Red Hollow? Boone offered me 500. Henry looked up. That much? Caleb nodded. For land nobody wanted yesterday. Walter's pen stopped moving. Caleb saw it. He leaned against the desk. How many men owned Red Hollow before Turner? Walter answered too quickly. Don't know. Henry did. 3. Caleb turned toward him. In how long? 19 years. What happened to them? Henry hesitated. The room seemed quieter. First man stayed 6 months. Second lasted 11 weeks. And the third? For days. Caleb felt the medallion beneath his shirt. What made them leave? Henry rubbed his jaw. Depends who you ask. I'm asking you. The sheriff looked toward Walter. Walter stared down at his ledger. Henry lowered his voice. One claimed riders watched the ranch every night. Apache. He never said. The others. One abandoned cattle, horse, rifle. Everything. Caleb frowned. A man doesn't leave his rifle. No, unless he's scared. Henry nodded. Walter suddenly closed the ledger. The place is cursed, that's all. Caleb looked at him. You believe in curses? No, then why say it? Walter went pale. Caleb stepped closer. What was Boone looking for? Walter said nothing. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Walter. Still nothing. Then Henry moved to a cabinet and pulled out an old survey book. Dust rose when he opened it. He turned several pages. Stopped. A section had been cut cleanly from the binding. Caleb stared at the missing paper. What was there? Henry answered quietly. Water survey. The words landed harder than Caleb expected. When? 15 years ago. Where? Henry looked at him. East of Dry Creek. Caleb already knew the answer. Red Hollow. Henry nodded. Walter stood abruptly. That survey was wrong. Caleb turned. How do you? No. Walter froze. Another mistake. Caleb stepped toward him. You said you didn't know anything. Outside, a horse stopped hard in the street. Caleb glanced through the window. Silas Boone sat across from the land office. Watching. No smile. No wave. Just watching. Caleb touched the hidden silver medallion beneath his shirt. Now the pattern was clear. Boone had bought land south of town. A survey had vanished. 3 ranchers had fled Red Hollow. And a man who called the ranch worthless was suddenly desperate to own it. Caleb looked back at the missing page. Red Hollow was not hiding gold. It was hiding water. But one question still remained. Why did the Apache care who controlled it? By the time Caleb Morgan returned to Red Hollow, the ridge had changed. 7 riders were no longer 7. There were 20 now, then 30. By late afternoon, he stopped counting. Apache horsemen stood along the high ground in scattered lines, silent beneath a sky turning red with dust and sunset. No one shouted. No one rode down. No rifles were raised. That silence carried more weight than noise ever could. Caleb dismounted near the porch. His bay gelding was uneasy. So was he. Maya Redbird appeared just before sundown. She came alone, riding down the eastern slope with the same calm posture she had worn that morning. Caleb waited beside the boarded well. You knew they'd come. Maya stopped her horse. I knew they might. He pulled the silver medallion from beneath his shirt. I found the survey. Her eyes narrowed. Part of it. Enough to know Boone lied. Maya looked toward Dry Creek. Dust was already rising on the southern road. Caleb saw it too. A lot of dust. How many? She did not answer. The riders from town appeared minutes later. Silas Boone came first. Sheriff Henry Cole rode beside him. Behind them followed ranchers, merchants, hired hands, and men who had probably never seen Red Hollow before that day. Some carried rifles across their saddles. Most looked frightened. Fear made men dangerous long before anger did. Silas reined in hard. You see what you've done? Caleb glanced toward the ridge. Then back at him. Bought a ranch. This isn't a joke. You thought it was yesterday. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Silas pointed toward Maya. She's been here twice. Maya dismounted slowly. And Silas looked at the townsmen. They're gathering because of him. One man behind the sheriff called out. You selling them the water? Caleb turned. Water nobody believed existed? The man looked away. Silas's voice rose. He's making some kind of deal. Maya stepped beside Caleb. No deal. Silas laughed sharply. Then why are 100 Apache riders sitting above us? The valley went still. Caleb looked toward the ridge. There were more now. Families too. Older men. Younger riders. Not a war party. Not exactly. But enough people to make every hand in Dry Creek rest closer to a gun. Sheriff Henry raised his voice. Nobody touches iron. No one argued. That helped. Then one rider separated from the Apache line. An older man. Gray braids. Straight back. No weapon in his hands. Maya lowered her head slightly. The old man rode down alone. He stopped beside the boarded well. His eyes moved from Caleb to the silver medallion. Then to Silas Boone. Silas changed. Barely. But Caleb saw it. Recognition. The old man looked at Caleb. Open it. Silas answered first. No, every face turned toward him. He realized the mistake immediately. Too late. Caleb looked at the boards. Then at Silas. You seem mighty worried about a dry well. Silas stepped forward. Leave it closed. Caleb rested one hand on the first weathered plank. Maya watched him. The sheriff watched him. The town watched him. So did every rider on the ridge. Caleb pulled. The rusted nail screamed loose. Cold air rose from the darkness below. Then came a sound that changed the whole valley. Water. moving beneath the stone. The water was not deep. That was the first surprise. The second was where it came from. Caleb Morgan knelt beside the opened well, while Sheriff Henry Cole held the lantern over the stone rim. The light reached only partway down. Enough to show wet rock. Enough to show movement. A narrow stream entered through a natural crack in the eastern wall, cold and steady, feeding the chamber below before disappearing beneath another shelf of stone. Not a dead well, a springhead. Maya Redbird stood beside Caleb. Her face had gone quiet. Not relieved. Not yet. Silas Boone had stopped speaking entirely. That told Caleb more than any confession could have. The old Apache chief stepped closer to the rim. Lower the lantern. Henry tied it carefully to a rope. Caleb guided it downward. The glow slid across the stone. 10 feet. 12. Then Maya saw something. There. Caleb leaned over. A rectangular shape sat inside a narrow masonry recess several feet above the waterline. Not natural stone. Someone had built it there. He looked at Henry. Rope. They tied a hook to the end. The first attempt missed. The second scraped stone. On the third, metal caught. Caleb felt the weight change. Easy, Henry said. Together they pulled. A small tin document box rose from the darkness. Water dripped from the rope. The box itself was dry. Mostly. Wax sealed the edges beneath years of dust and mineral stain. Silas took one step forward. Don't open that. Nobody moved. Caleb looked up. Silas realized what he had said. Again. Too late. Maya's eyes hardened. You know what is inside. Silas scoffed. I know old men hide nonsense everywhere. Caleb placed the box on the well cover. His fingers found the corroded latch. The old chief watched without blinking. So did the town. So did the Apache riders above. The latch broke. Inside lay oilcloth. Caleb unwrapped it slowly. A survey map appeared first. Then 2 folded deeds. Then a third paper covered in faded signatures. Henry took the map. His expression changed immediately. What? Caleb asked. The sheriff lifted the lantern. A blue line had been drawn from Red Hollow through the valley toward Dry Creek. Branches spread south toward Cattle Flats and east toward Apache grazing ground. Maya pointed to the source mark. Here. Red Hollow. Caleb looked toward the open springhead. Then back at the map. This feeds the valley. Yes, Maya said. Silas finally moved. That map is old. Henry looked at him. Water doesn't care. A murmur spread through the townsmen. The old chief reached beneath his shirt and removed a silver chain. Something hung from it. Half an eagle. Caleb felt his breath stop. He pulled his own medallion from beneath his shirt. Maya took both pieces, held them together. The broken edges matched perfectly. For the first time, the eagle was whole. The old chief looked at Caleb. My father carried one half. Caleb glanced at the papers. And Elias Turner's family carried the other. The chief nodded. Henry unfolded the signed document. His eyes moved slowly across the page, then stopped. Silas watched him. What does it say? Henry did not answer immediately. He read the line again, then looked toward the ridge, toward the townspeople, toward the flowing spring. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Red Hollow was never meant to own this water. The valley went silent. Henry lifted the agreement. It was meant to protect it. Caleb looked at Silas Boone, and for the first time, he understood why a worthless ranch had suddenly become worth everything. The agreement was older than most of the men standing around it. Caleb Morgan could see that before Sheriff Henry Cole read another word. The paper had yellowed at the folds. The ink had faded, but the signatures remained. 2 families. 2 sides of the valley. One promise. Henry held the lantern closer. This spring is to remain open to settlers, Apache families, travelers, and livestock passing through Red Hollow. Silas Boone laughed once. Short. Dry. That paper is decades old. The old Apache chief looked at him. So is thirst. Nobody answered. Caleb looked at the survey again. The blue line beneath Red Hollow fed everything south of the ridge. Dry Creek. The Cattle Flats. The Wagon Road. Even the land Silas had quietly purchased over the years. It all depended on water passing through one place. This place. Silas finally stepped forward. You own the ranch, Morgan. Caleb looked at him. That's what the deed says. Then the spring is yours. Maya Redbird turned toward Silas. No, her voice was calm. That made the word heavier. Silas pointed at the papers. Those people are dead. Maya's expression did not change. The promise is not. A murmur moved through the townsmen. Caleb felt every eye shift toward him. The Apache on the ridge, the men from Dry Creek, Sheriff Henry, Maya, even Silas. For the first time since the auction, Caleb understood what Elias Turner had meant. You buying land or responsibility? Silas reached inside his coat. $1,000. The valley went still. Caleb said nothing. Silas continued. Cash. $1,000. Enough cattle to build a herd. Enough lumber to rebuild the barn. Enough money to put glass in every window and shingles across the roof. Enough to change Caleb Morgan's life. Silas saw him thinking. 2,000. Someone behind Henry whispered. Caleb kept his eyes on Silas. What happens to the water? Silas smiled. Business happens. Maya looked toward the spring. People pay. People always pay. For water. For access. The old chief lowered his eyes. Not in surrender. In recognition. He had heard words like that before. Silas stepped closer. 3,000. Caleb looked at the open springhead. Cold water moved through the stone chamber below. Quietly. Indifferent to money. Then he looked toward the ridge. Apache families had begun appearing behind the riders. Children wrapped in blankets. Older women. Men with tired horses. Down below, Dry Creek ranchers stood with dust on their boots and fear in their faces. Different people. Same dry country. Maya held the two halves of the silver eagle together in her palm. My grandfather kept his half until he died. Caleb looked at her. Why? Because he did not trust your people to remember. The words landed hard. Then she added, he hoped one would. Silas held out his hand. $3,000, cowboy. Caleb removed his revolver. Several men stiffened. He did not raise it. He placed it carefully on the well cover. Then he looked at Henry. Got a hammer? The sheriff understood before Silas did. Henry handed him one. Caleb walked to the old iron gate beside the spring channel. Silas's face changed. Don't. Caleb swung once. The rusted lock broke. The gate opened. Water rushed into the stone channel. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just steady. Certain. Maya pressed the two pieces of silver together. The eagle became whole. Caleb watched the water move toward the valley. Red Hollow had never been the treasure. The choice was. By the second week of summer, nobody in Dry Creek laughed about Red Hollow Ranch anymore. The heat had changed everything. Grass turned brittle beneath the sun. Shallow creeks became ribbons of mud. Two wells near town failed before noon on the same day. By evening, wagons were already rolling toward Red Hollow. Caleb Morgan watched them come from the porch. Ranchers first, then families, then Apache riders from the eastern ridge. Nobody asked who belonged there. Nobody needed to. The stone channel Caleb had opened ran day and night, carrying cold spring water into troughs and barrels beneath the cottonwoods. He repaired the broken fence that week, but he never replaced the lock. That was what people noticed. The gate stayed open. Maya Redbird came most mornings, sometimes with Apache families, sometimes alone. She rarely spoke about the silver eagle now hanging beside the springhead, its two halves joined by a thin leather cord. It did not need explaining. 3 weeks into the drought, Silas Boone appeared. Alone. His horse stumbled beneath him, white foam drying along its neck. Behind Silas, 2 hired hands struggled with a small cattle herd farther down the road. The animals had gone most of the day without water. Silas stopped outside the open gate. Caleb was repairing a trough. Maya was filling a wooden bucket nearby. Everyone saw him. Nobody called out. Silas dismounted slowly. Pride made some men stand taller. It made Silas Boone hesitate. His eyes moved toward the running water. Then toward Caleb. My cattle need a drink. Caleb rested the hammer against his knee. For one long moment, Silas waited. Maybe for a price. Maybe for humiliation. Maybe for Caleb to remind him about the $3,000. Caleb only nodded toward the channel. Bring them through. Silas stared at him. Nothing more came. No sermon. No punishment. Just water. An hour later, his cattle crowded the trough beside Apache horses and Dry Creek livestock. The sun burned white above them all. Nobody seemed to care which animal belonged to whom. Near sunset, Maya moved along the line with a tin dipper. When she reached Silas, he held an empty canteen. He did not look at her. Maya filled it anyway. Water struck the metal softly. Silas took the canteen. His fingers tightened around it. For a second, Caleb thought he might speak. He did not. He drank. Maya moved to the next person. That evening, Elias Turner returned. Caleb saw the old man standing beside the gate as shadows stretched across Red Hollow. Nobody knew where Elias had been. Caleb decided it no longer mattered. "You opened it," Elias said. Caleb looked toward the channel. Seemed wrong to keep it closed. Elias studied the settlers and Apache families filling their buckets together. Then he smiled. "You understood the deed." Caleb shook his head. "No." He glanced toward the silver eagle hanging beside the spring. "I understood the responsibility." Elias nodded once. Then he left before dark. Red Hollow never made Caleb Morgan rich. The barn still leaned south. The cabin roof still leaked during heavy rain. His boots remained worn. But travelers began measuring distance by the ranch. 2 days from Tucson. Half a day from Dry Creek. And water at Red Hollow. Years later, children would ask why Apache families and townspeople used the same spring. The older men rarely gave long answers. Some remembered riding there expecting trouble. Others remembered calling Caleb a fool. Most remembered Silas Boone standing quietly with an empty canteen while Maya Redbird filled it. Nobody had drawn a gun. Nobody had been forced to kneel. The West already had enough stories about bullets. Red Hollow was remembered for something quieter. A broken silver eagle. An old promise. A gate that stayed open. And water given freely to whoever arrived thirsty.